David Haye has posted several videos on his social media over the past week or so, which I'll leave links to in the description below. So go have a look at those videos and tell me what you think. As far as what I think, he's been bouncing around in these videos on his feet. I guess trying to demonstrate that his ankle is very much on the mend from that Achilles injury. Perhaps even 100% healed. But it's very different doing those kind of light, slow exercises at your own pace than it is when you're in the ring in a pressure situation where your body feels far more tense, where you're on a canvas which is, a little bit more spongy than the deck that David Haye was exercising on. You got your boots on and you're trying to make little sharp foot movements and then deliver with full power against a target. That's very different than what David Haye is doing in these videos. So it remains to be seen if David Haye's ankle can hold up to the stresses and strains of actually being in a boxing ring trading blows rather than just doing some light exercises outdoors. But still, have a look at it for yourselves. Let me know what you think. I guess the question is, can David Haye get anywhere close to his old form again? The kind of form he was in when he knocked out Derek Chisora in 5 rounds back in, when was it, 2012? Can he get back to that level? I think it's highly unlikely. Can he improve on where he was in the Tony Bellew fight? Well, I find it hard to imagine him being worse, but you never know, because even prior to rupturing that Achilles tendon in the fight, I guess it was a pre-existing injury, but it was aggravated in the fight and clearly went again after a couple of rounds. But prior to that, even from the first round, David Haye just looked off. His movement looked off, his coordination looked off, his timing was off, everything about him just looked off. And as I've said in previous videos, this was something that I pointed out even in David Haye's first comeback fight and his second comeback fight. I said David Haye's stance looks wrong, it looks different, his movement looks off. And yes, he's been able to knock these guys out, but he just don't look like the same old David Haye. He still looks powerful, still got hand speed, but his foot speed don't seem to be there. His stance is all weird. The way he's throwing punches looks weird. And again, at the time, a lot of people were angry with me for saying that. They said, Hatman, I don't know what you're looking at. He looks exactly like the old David Haye. So what some people were saying. Go back and look at those videos where I reviewed David Haye against what was his name now? He fought Judge, and the guy before that was Mark Demori. Yeah, go look at the comments on some of those videos. People were saying, no, Hatman, you don't know what you're looking at. His stance is no different than the old David Haye. No, his stance is totally different. The way he's throwing punches is totally different than the old David Haye. But sometimes people only see what they want to see, and I guess those people were big David Haye fans. I'm, I guess, one of the older people that does these type of YouTube videos, whereas a lot of the people who are subscribed to my channel are maybe a little bit younger. Some of them only started watching boxing when David Haye was cruiserweight champion. So I guess they don't really notice certain things as easily as people who are a bit more experienced in watching boxing and being involved in boxing, so on and so forth. It was the same the other week when I made my prediction for Sergey Kovalev versus Andre Ward. I'd said in many previous videos, and I reiterated in that video, that I noticed in the Nathan Cleverly fight that Sergey Kovalev looked uncomfortable when he was landing good shots on Cleverly and Cleverly was going nowhere, smiling at him and kept pressing forward. And he was getting anxious, and there were some, ominous signs from Kovalev of a psychological weakness in that fight prior to landing his breakthrough right hand, which shook Nathan Cleverly and led to Cleverly's destruction. I picked up on that when I actually watched the fight live, and I mentioned it in my post-fight review for that fight. I mentioned that Kovalev looked uneasy under pressure, and he could be one of those kind of guys that's a on-top fighter. It's all good when he's bullying somebody, but when somebody puts it on him, he'll capitulate and whatnot relatively easily. And that turned out to be the case, even in the Andre Ward fight. But at the time, I noticed these little subtle things, and other people noticed it too. I watched the Box Nation broadcast of that fight, but later on, I ended up watching the HBO broadcast of the fight as well. It was on Daily Motion or YouTube or whatever, and they pointed out, the commentators on the HBO broadcast pointed out the same thing that I pointed out. Prior to Kovalev landing that big right hand that shook up Cleverly, they pointed out that Kovalev was looking uncomfortable, looking at the referee for help and complaining and stuff like that prior to shaking up Cleverly. So it's these little things that you notice. And as I say, I noticed with David Haye that he just didn't look right in those 2 comeback fights, man. He just looked different. It was not the same David Haye. His movement was off. Coordination was off. But in the Bellew fight, there's no question he looked even worse. Far worse. But that's because Bellew made him look worse. Because Bellew was a hell of a lot better than the likes of Jurjai or Mark Damori. He was able to use foot movement and angles to exploit David Haye's severely hampered foot speed and coordination and timing problems. So, you got to take your hats off to Bellew for that. But anyway, can David Haye regain some old form? Can he be better than he was in the Bellew fight? I certainly hope so, because I always enjoyed watching David Haye fight. So if he can become a player in the heavyweight division again, it will be a good thing. But I struggle to imagine that he will. He might be able to get a title shot somehow, some way, but for him to regain the kind of form he had against Chisora, I don't see it. And I think that's the kind of form that he would need to really be dangerous and ultra competitive. Maybe not, let me say dangerous, because he's still dangerous. He can still punch. But in terms of being ultra competitive and a serious major force in the heavyweight division, he'd need to be at least as good as he was against Derek Chisora. And anything can happen in boxing, but I'd be amazed if he could regain anywhere close to that type of form. It's going to be interesting to see who he selects as a trainer. There's some, I believe, Cuban coach that he's been linked with. I think that could be one of the most vital aspects of David Haye's continued comeback, is who he chooses as his trainer. And it's going to be hard for David Haye to move forward. Actually, no, maybe it won't be hard for David Haye to move forward. I was going to say it's going to be hard for David Haye to move forward without gaining revenge over Bellew. But actually, a lot of the champions out there and top contenders might see David Haye as very vulnerable now. He's still a big name, but they might see him as very vulnerable, and they'll think, you know what, now I'll actually fight David Haye, because I'm going to get a decent amount of money out of it, and he looked terrible in the Bellew fight. I can beat this guy. So it might be a blessing in disguise, actually, for David Haye to have lost so badly against Bellew, because it might be easier for him to get some of the bigger names now, if he wants those bigger names. Maybe he himself don't want to be fighting contenders. He wants to fight a Bellew and then go straight for a title shot. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. As I say, go watch the videos of David Haye training. Let me know what you think. There are links in the description below. All right, Satman, I'm out.